You have a lot of power, Governor, but you're not going to call the bride of Christ non-essential.
Today we're joined by one of the most faithful voices in the American church, and honestly a real hero here at TPUSA Faith. I'm talking about Pastor Rob McCoy. He's a bold leader, a clear communicator, and someone who's never backed down from preaching the truth in the public square. You're going to be sharpened and encouraged by this conversation. You're not going to want to miss it. Okay, Rob, thank you for sitting down for a little bit. It's always a pleasure to see you. We're having a lot of guests on the show, and a lot of these guys are guys that I know, but you're a friend, and you've been an advisor to me. You're somebody on my short list when I need to call somebody and say, hey, what do you think about this, or how do I navigate this? And I've just valued so much from your friendship and just the wisdom that you've poured into not only me but our whole department here at TPUSA Faith. And so thanks for being with us and spending a little time.
Yeah, it was a joy. And you're on a short list. I was thinking I'm maybe on a short bus. So that's good. It's a blessing to be with you, Lucas. And I would just add to your kind introduction, what a joy it's been to watch you take the helm of TPUSA Faith. I mean, we've had some good folks leading it, but this is a whole new season that's taken it to a whole nother level.
I appreciate that.
And just blessed by it.
Thank you.
Yeah, man.
No, it's awesome. I'd love to dive into a whole bunch of stuff today, and what does faith look like with Trump in office? What does how do we navigate? We're seeing so many pastors fall by the wayside and struggle today and struggled through COVID. How do we navigate all that? But before we get to maybe some of those topics, I'd love to just set up for the audience here. Many of our listeners are going to be very familiar with you because they've been around the Turning Point ecosystem for some time. But why don't you give us just a little bit of your story? You have spent time both as a pastor and an elected official. How did you get here within the TPUSA Faith and with your relationship with Charlie?
Well, pastoring at Godspeak, Calvary Chapel Godspeak in Thousand Oaks, California for 25 years. Raised my 5 kids there in the town. And I ran for office while I was pastoring. First time I ran for state assembly, I won the primary, lost the general. And then my opponent, who won the seat, vacated their seat on the city council.
Was that something you always wanted to do, or was that, did somebody kind of come alongside of you and say, hey, this maybe you should run sort of thing?
No, it wasn't something I always wanted to do. My dad had run for office twice when we lived in San Diego, Coronado, California. So I was familiar. My mother was president of Republican Women, so I was familiar with walking
it's a proximity
precincts.
to, yeah.
And I was a Republican before I was a Christian. I was active politically before I was active spiritually.
Okay.
And so it just seems strange to me that I now become a pastor of a church, and it seems as though, especially with Calvary Chapels, which are verse by verse, chapter by chapter, book by book, teaching the whole counsel of God's word, it was strange to me that they weren't involved in the public square. It just seemed like a disconnect. And as I would dig deeper, I'd find out why. But that was always something I did. From the very first day I took the church, we'd have candidates come in and I'd interview them because I go, how can you expect them to represent you when you don't know who they are? So I've been doing that for 25 years. Nothing changed on that. How I met Charlie was through my son, Michael. He was in high school at Oaks Christian, and he just loved Charlie because Oaks Christian was going through a woke period. They were doing DEI and critical race here. They say they weren't, but they were, and there's still issues there. They're getting better, but problematic. And Mikey was just trying to navigate his life at that school, and tuned into Charlie and was telling me, you got to check this guy out, Dad. And I ended up running into him at a conservative radio conference that they had in Ontario, California, and from that we became friends. And
what year would that have been?
Gosh, I want to say 2018, 2019.
Okay.
Yeah. It escalated to where I was going to be the executive director of the Falkirk Institute, which I ended up deciding not to do it, and then Charlie ended up leaving that, and we just dug in with Turning Point, and then Charlie wanted to figure out how to reach pastors, and so we put on a couple of pastors conferences. The first one we did in San Diego, and it was amazing. I mean, and TPUSA Faith has an unbelievable ability to network. Turning Point does, and I attribute that to Charlie. He's a phenom, and now he's gone through the stratosphere, and he'll periodically say that's my pastor, and I think I seldom see the guy. He's so busy. He's just all over the place all the time.
Well, no, I think that's, I think that history it's valuable. I think that the evolution of how we got here is so important. As you mentioned, I mean, this has become kind of this, not only is Charlie a phenom, I think what we've seen, being able to get pastors from across so many different denominations in the room together, talking, working on these issues together, that's not normal. What would you say to, the young pastor out there, or maybe the pastor that's been at it for a while, that is never really crossed over into the realm of kind of the, dealing with some more of the cultural issues head on, or if we use this term political, they've never put their toes in that at all, but they're ideologically aligned, but there's been hesitation either because of, pressure or maybe not feeling like they're as well versed on the topics as they should be. What would be your advice to that guy?
That's a great question, because most of those pastors have been influenced by a concerted effort by the left to remove Christians from the political realm and out of the public square, and they've infiltrated the seminaries to indoctrinate pastors that, hey, we just preach the gospel, we don't do politics, and that's, as you've heard me say, that's an early church heresy. That's Gnosticism, where you're separating the holy from the tainted. Politics is dirty.
Yeah.
Their confusion, many of the pastors, is they think politics means poly, meaning many, and ticks, meaning blood-sucking parasite. But it actually means polis, the affairs of the city, the concerns of the city. And as Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 29, pray for the peace of the city in which you dwell, for in its peace you'll have peace. And then Jesus, when asked what's the great commandment, to love the Lord your God, but then he also goes on to say to love your neighbor as yourself. So we want to do good for our neighbor. We want to be concerned with the affairs of the city in which we dwell. And more importantly, Matthew 16:18, the word that was used when Jesus turned to Peter after his profession that you're the Christ, the Son of the living God, up at Caesarea Philippi. And then Jesus says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And upon this rock I'll build my, and everyone says church, but Jesus didn't use a religious term. He didn't say synagogue or temple. He deliberately used a secular term, ecclesia or ecclesia, which the etymology of it goes all the way back to Aristotle, to the Greek city-states where the citizens would gather for the concerns of the city. And so when you read that and you see it where it says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood is not revealed that to you, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates which enslave and the gates of hell will not prevail. It's fascinating that the law can be the wise restraints that make men free, meaning that if you and this is the beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, Sadducees, and of Herod, Jesus says. The leaven is trying to create civil law apart from the moral law, the Decalogue.
Yeah.
Now the law doesn't save, but it says in Galatians 3, it's a school teacher, guardian to point us to Christ until faith comes. So the leaven would be attempting to establish civil law apart from the moral law. And if you apply the moral law to civil law, then it becomes a wise restraints that make men free, because it points you to the one who sets you free. You're rowing in the streams of liberty, you'll find its source, the Lord. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. You remove the moral law, then it becomes a weapon to enslave, like they've done in California. The church is non-essential. Your business is non-essential. Pastors are now waking up, especially in California, as they've seen the censorship and the tyranny.
I remember, I think my wife had seen you first. I don't know if it was on Fox or if it was on another, news show, but that you'd done an interview, I think, speaking as both pastor and mayor. And she had caught that and said, you need to connect with that Rob McCoy guy. And, I didn't know much about Turning Point at that time. I think I'd seen some Charlie videos and those things, but, it just wasn't on my radar a whole lot. We were fighting our own battles in South Bend with Mayor Pete and everything else that was going on where I was pastoring. But, we fortunately had a governor that did the right thing in stating that the church was essential. And now, the fact of the matter is, everything should have been essential and you make your own choices, period. But we didn't have the political pressure that maybe the state of California did. Took a lot of things head on, yourself, Jack Hibbs, other guys out there in California, John MacArthur, obviously a lot of attention there. What was your experience and how did you push back? Because I think that provides a roadmap for pastors for the next thing that could come up, or in 10 years from now or 20 years from now, or God forbid even sooner than that. How did you navigate that as a both pastor and somebody who understands the importance of Christians playing a role in the kingdom of man during this time as well?
If the only thing was simply the church is non-essential. That's all I need to hear.
Yeah.
You
Nothing else matters.
You have a lot of power, Governor, but you're not going to call the bride of Christ non-essential. We'll follow the CDC standards. We'll do all of that, but you're not going to keep communion from them. You're not going to tell them that they can't worship. I'm sorry, Governor. And even as we dug in deeper, you could just see it was tyranny.
Yeah.
To the greatest extent. And the pastors complied with the tyranny, and they had so many of them use Romans 13 to do it, which that's not what the text says.
Right.
It says God appoints all positions of authority, and we're to submit to them. But it also points out that those authorities are there for our good.
Yeah.
When they cease to do good, they cease to be the authority.
You did something, I think, for not just your own church, not just for California, but I think that you offered a model and a polemic really with your life in how to stand against tyranny as a pastor and as a leader in this way. So many pastors weren't ready for this. They just didn't know what to do. I mean, I remember I was actually in California the weekend that the news was that kind of like patient zero arrived on a flight to LA or whatever. And I was at an event with Candace Cameron Bure. We got PureFlix brought us in. I interviewed her on stage with, probably, 500 students at Biola University. And, we're shaking hands and hugging everybody afterwards. Now, her probably a lot more than me because everybody was really there to see her. And we got done with the event and, I'm flying home. The news comes out that there was like patient zero in LA. And then, we're texting back and forth. And she's like, I think I just shook like 500 hands, and just nobody knew what it was at the start. And so pastors, we were making masks at our church. We were dropping off supplies to the hospital, like week 1 and 2, we're in, however we can help. And then, like you said, right away, it was like, something doesn't smell right about this. And, we stayed open. I think we went virtual for 3 Sundays and then we're like, no, we're staying open. This is silly. And, but you demonstrated, I think, in a way, not just of staying open, but of how to stand up. I mean, even the threat of this financial pressure. And I think that, the church in America owes a great debt to you for what you exhibited.
That's gracious. I don't agree.
I know you don't. That's why we do.
No, see, Jesus said, go and make disciples of all nations. That was his great commission. And baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And lo, I'm with you to the end of the age. This is a Christian worldview. We don't make converts. We make disciples.
Yeah.
And the Christian worldview is to see everything through that perspective. I said, you guys are listing all the things that I would have lost and sacrificed. But you don't understand. I wasn't looking at that. That's irrelevant. My Christian worldview puts it over here that whatever all this is that I could lose pales in comparison to what I would lose with the peace of mind that in the midst of the conflict, he's a peace that surpasses all understanding. That the joy and generationally what it would provide. All I would simply say is it was just perspective, Lucas.
Yeah, that's good.
That's all it was.
That's good.
It wasn't anything brave. It was just perspective.
Pastors, can I be real for a second? When was the last time that you looked into the company handling your church's giving platform? Because the reality is there's a lot of companies out there funneling money into causes that are completely opposed to the gospel we preach. It really becomes hidden wokeism. That's why I want to point you to a company that I trust, SecureGive. SecureGive isn't just another tech startup chasing profits. It was started by a pastor for pastors. Their goal is to strengthen the local church, not cash in on it. They're privately owned, debt-free, built right here in the USA, and rooted in biblical conservative values. No woke investors, no compromise. And when it comes to security, they don't play games. Your giving data is protected with industry-leading encryption. And if you ever need help, they've got real people that you can call, available 24/7, who care about your church just as much as you do. That's why major churches like Prestonwood and Dream City use SecureGive, and why I think that you should too. Visit securegive.com/turningpoint to schedule a conversation with their team today. SecureGive, where your mission is their mission. Let me share something that's truly life-changing. Pregnancy centers trained by SperaVita, who are seeing over 70% of abortion-minded women choose life. That's not a small win. That's 4 times the national average. This isn't just training, it's transformation. SperaVita equips pregnancy centers with real tools and gospel-grounded strategies to reach women before it's too late. And I've been able to work with them personally. Right now, with abortion pills being shipped straight to mailboxes, women are ending pregnancies in isolation, alone, scared, and without hope. SperaVita is stepping into that gap with clarity, compassion, and proven results. But more than that, they offer the hope of the gospel. Every encounter is an opportunity to save a baby and share the love of Jesus with a woman in crisis. Because she just doesn't need options. She needs someone who will walk with her in truth and grace. Here's how you can help. Go to SperaVita.com or SaveMoreBabies.com. Just $45 covers the cost to reach one woman at high risk for abortion. The goal? Train 250 centers, save 1 million lives. Be a part of it today. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the past, right, of what we came from. I think there's a lot of people that are going, okay, we've got a new president in office. We're seeing the golden age of America. We have, so many, things that are getting pushed back and rolled back and exposed and everything else that's taking place. Where do you see the church moving over the next, 2, 4, 6 years? What's the opportunity before us right now as pastors and people of God?
Yeah, we have been given a reprieve, and we have a very short window. And there's an awakening in the country to conservative ideas. When I say conservative ideas, conserving and pursuing truth.
Yeah.
And they're rowing in these streams of liberty. But if the shepherds of America don't step up, you have the largest voting bloc in U.S. history of 30 and unders voting conservative. And this is and Charlie, I mean, an internal audit on TikTok, he's the number one source for 30 and under for political choices.
Yeah.
This is a massive wave. And those young people that voted conservative, that's an imprint, like a chick with the mother hen. That's for life. I remember the first time I voted at 18. The first time I voted for president was Reagan. That's an imprint. I voted conservative the rest of my life. And that's what's happened with these young people. And myself, much like the current crop of young people, when I was younger, I wasn't a Christian.
Yeah.
But I voted conservative. And it led me to this relationship with the Lord and these conservative principles. But pastors who have abdicated their responsibility in the ecclesia, the public square, they're not going to be there to minister to these young people. They want a future, but they're not going to attend the churches where your eschatology has left them nothing but a rapture. You don't know the day or the hour. I'm pre-trib, premillennial, but you don't know the day or the hour. And it's no longer self-fulfilling prophecy where you get to, and you should know the hour. Hey, every generation is expected a soon return. But are you occupying? Are you busy until he comes? And are you more than a conqueror and acting as such?
Yeah.
Or are you, retreating and going underground as a fear of man? That's not what a shepherd does. They're looking for leadership and step up and do it. And for those of you who bowed the knee to the tyrants and ran after the mammon, the money, and compromised your convictions with the Lord so that you could get a Soros handout and remain silent, that needs to stop. Repent.
We had Dr. George Barna on the show here recently, and I know he's a friend, and I think attends your church from time to time.
He's a congregant. Yeah. He attends more than Charlie does.
Yeah, and and I've known George for a while. I love him. And I was teasing him because I feel like he's the most optimistic I've ever really seen him, and kind of the state of the nation right now, which I think is really exciting. One of the things we were talking about the difference between I use the term Christian worldview, and he corrected me, and he goes, it's really important that we use the term biblical worldview and not just Christian worldview, because that it doesn't, that term has been watered down so much. I think that we really have to point to the source, which I thought was a great point in all of this. And I've seen pastors that I can almost understand on the surface. I mean, obviously you and I are entrenched in this on a daily basis, but I can understand a pastor that has not ever had a proximity to TPUSA faith, or they maybe lived in a state where they didn't have the same pressures that you face in California, but the problem is that I'm seeing some of those same guys where it's like, okay, fine, let's just say fine, but you're not talking about gender, sexuality, marriage. You're not talking about, national sovereignty and relates to, the flood that's happened at our southern border, all these other social issues that really, in my opinion, are first and foremost theological issues. Set aside all the political talk, all the words about candidates, all the thoughts about voting and voting cycles and getting out the vote. If we would just teach a biblical worldview on those major issues, then the vote would be really easy. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say to the pastors, whatever you feel about Trump, whatever you feel about Turning Point, whatever you feel about Charlie or me or you, Lucas, is irrelevant.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you feel about God's word, and looking at looking at the culture in which you've been placed. It says in James, "He who knows the good to do and does not do it, to him it is sin." You won't study to show yourself approved. You won't do it on their behalf. And you call yourself a shepherd? And anyone attending that church, you would allow that generation to be neglected because it's more convenient to have a TED Talk with music on a Sunday because you don't want to be challenged? And you call that the gospel? I just don't, I can't process it. Lead, follow, or get out of the way.
What you just shared, it's a living epistle, I think, in many ways of your life and just what you've witnessed, and I think the what God's placed on your heart for the church, and you have been such an inspiration to this movement. Thankfully, we are seeing a lot of pastors stand up, rise up. It's important to recognize, like, we've been here before. And so just to our audience out there, look, if today's the first day after hearing this and hearing what Pastor Rob is sharing, that you're going, man, I need to get into this fight. If that's day one for you, welcome to the team. Rob, thank you so much for just your commitment to the faith, to TPUSA faith, to everything we're doing here. We get to spend probably quite a bit of time together this year, maybe some travels and trips. I'm excited about sharing more about those as we go. And so thanks for taking a moment. Final word here. How can people find out more about you and anything you'd like to share at the end?
Oh, they don't need to know about me. But what I would say this to pastors that you have just encouraged. If you were one of those that wasn't all in or wasn't in at all.
Yeah.
When we're honest with God, He's merciful with us. I would say to every one of those pastors, I'll help you.
Yeah.
Personally, you tell me the areas where you're struggling with, and I'd love to spend time with you and encourage you. You can reach me at rob@godspeak.com. Send me an email. And if I can help you, I will.
Rob, thank you so much for being on Strong Church here at TPUSA Faith. I'm your host, Lucas Miles. Until next time, stay strong.